Getting into the Pokemon trading card game is easier than ever before, but with dozens of products, multiple formats, and thousands of cards to choose from, where do you start? If you're building on a budget, then there's always the trusty theme deck. With a bit of cash and a lot of creativity, you can build something bold and battle ready. You're watching Deck Boss. Hi everyone, and welcome to Deck Boss, the show where we take classic theme decks and give them a competitive tune-up. This week, we're going to try and supercharge the brand new Victini V Battle Deck. The Victini V Battle Deck is a bit underwhelming considering that it and its ilk will be replacing theme decks going forward, but it's not without some merit. In a Deck Boss first, the boss monster is a 2-prizer, and it's a key stepping stone towards building a Victini VMAX deck. The Deck Boss aside, the rest of the list leaves much to be desired with just a few staple cards and a ton of filler. It is a rocky place to start, but we'll see what we can do. Now let's crack this open and meet our Deck Boss. The Victini V Battle Deck is built around Victini V. Obviously. This blazing little pixie is a basic Pokemon V with 2 attacks. The first attack, Spreading Flames, costs 1 colorless energy and allows you to attach up to 3 fire energies from your discard pile to your Pokemon in any way you like. Its second attack, Energy Burst, costs 2 fire energies and does 30 damage times the amount of energy attached to both active Pokemon. As far as deck bosses go, Victini V is a decent pick. It's a basic Pokemon, which makes it quick to play. It can provide its own energy acceleration, and both of its attacks provide good value for cost. But the Victory Pokemon has some minor drawbacks as well. Despite being a big basic, its HP is on the lower end, making it a bit squishy. It is extremely reliant on energy acceleration to become somewhat threatening, and it forces you to concentrate your resources onto one Pokemon. Making Victini V work is about 2 things and 2 things only: piling energy onto it and keeping that energy in play. If we can manage that, then this bite-sized inferno can incinerate everything in its path. Now, let's jump back to the theme deck and see what it gives us to work with. Okay, so aside from Victini, this deck's big attacker is Cinderace, which actually hits like a truck and can accelerate energy to itself through its Libero ability. I do like that it promotes mobility and isn't totally dependent on Welder, but it's a stage 2 and not our deck boss, so we're gonna pass on it for now. Cinccino provides some really nice consistency, and while it isn't quite Zoroark GX, it will be a staple card in a lot of decks post-rotation, so do hold on to your copies. Professor's Research is the only decent draw supporter here, which at least provides some much needed speed to this deck. Bead provides some very low-key energy acceleration, but it's honestly just an overbalanced welder, and it's not really worth your supporter for the turn. Sonya is actually a decent searcher for basic Pokemon or basic energy, and while it does get a bad rap as a quote-unquote starter card, it actually has quite a few niche uses in a lot of one-prize decks. Your Pokeball package consists of Level Ball, Great Ball, and Evolution Incense, which actually all have some merit, and at least 2 of them can provide some specific use both in this deck and in more rogue archetypes. And you get Switch, which is, well, Switch. And as for the rest, don't worry about it. The Victini V Battle Deck is about as vanilla as a pre-constructed product can be. It's a simple list that checks all the boxes in terms of the bare minimums for playing the game, but it lacks any real flavor or character. Again, if you're going to learn how to play the game, I guess you could do worse, and at least there's some value in here, even if it doesn't quite justify the price tag. But I will say it's at least a stepping stone to something much more promising. So there's always that. And now that we've got the basics, let's jump on over to PTCGO to see how we can make this deck work. So there were a couple of ways I could have taken this build, And that's not just because they give you only one copy of the actual deck boss. The deck itself just isn't really built to support Victini per se. It's actually more of a Cinderace deck. But, Flame and Pele isn't the box Pokemon, so we gotta work with Victini, and that's what we're gonna focus on. But then, Victini as a deck boss is in a curious position, because it's also a stepping stone to a much bigger, and situationally better, evolution. You might see the V Battle Deck as a way to get you started on the road to building a Victini VMAX deck for later on. And in this case, that's the route I decided to take. Also, I got really lucky opening Battle Styles packs and sniping trades, so I had plenty of the 3 prize pixies laying around. Now, in deck boss fashion, this is something geared more towards the expanded format, but you can find suitable replacements for almost everything here in the standard card pool if that's what you're interested in. And I will be posting a standard Victini VMAX list on the channel's Twitter account, so make sure to check that out there. So the big addition here obviously is 3 copies of Victini VMAX to go with our playset of the base deck boss. This thing is big, it accelerates energy, and in particular, it really hates on Pokemon V. For just 2 fire energies, it does 100 damage plus 120 more if the enemy active is a Pokemon V. And yes, that includes VMAXs. So you can wipe out almost every Pokemon V in one go and comfortably 2-shot all of the VMAXs. Just be mindful that its damage output is actually pretty limited against everything else, so there is often an argument for not evolving into the VMAX right away. Reshiram Charizard GX is your standard big basic in a Welder-based deck. It provides the raw damage output that Victini VMAX kind of lacks, and it gives you some means of piercing through annoying effects with Double Blaze GX. Volcanion is the ideal starter, allowing you to accelerate 3 fire energies from your deck to any Pokemon on your field if you go second. In most cases, you either fully charge a Reshiram or split that acceleration among a pair of Victini. Really, it's to suit the situation. Also, it's a nice single prize attacker that can actually hit for more damage than our VMAX, depending on your setup. Tapu Lele is our only support Pokemon of choice, allowing you to fetch a supporter from the deck. Typically, that's going to be Welder, but the nice thing is that Victini VMAX isn't totally reliant on Welder, so you can often grab something more situationally useful. Just be mindful about when you use Tapu Lele because of the next Pokemon that we've included in the deck. Now, I've been on something of a Garbodor tear. Between this and the Trashlanch Garbodor, I'm trying to slip these steaming trash heaps into every deck that I can. And actually, outside of Tapu Lele, you don't run abilities, so Garbotoxin can actually be pretty useful for slowing down the opponent. In particular, this is here as a means to hard counter Eternatus, shutting off Infinity Zone, which makes its damage output more manageable, and it also turns off annoying things like Deep Forest Camo, so there's that. But really, I was just, looking for an excuse to shove Garbodor in a deck, so here it is. And onto the trainers, Welder is an obvious 4 here because fire decks go burr, and Cynthia, on the other hand, allows you some more reliable draw power. And it is preferable because, as I often say, you've got plenty of stuff that you don't want to throw away, so while Professor Juniper is really cool, it's not really the draw support you want to run with in this particular case. Guzma provides some nice gusting power, and thanks to Garbodor and the high floatstone count that we have to play, it actually allows for quite a bit of mobility. And then there's Acerola, which is just busted with VMAXs. You can scoop up a heavily damaged Victini VMAX or a Reshiram and bring in a Victini V from the bench to follow up, either by attacking with Energy Burst or evolving up into the VMAX that you just recovered to your hand. This is particularly good with Victini VMAX because of how cheap its attacks are. Again, not being reliant on Welder. It's something to keep in mind and can really swing the game in your favor when played at the right moment. And since we're playing Expanded and I decided to go a little nuts here, we do have a playset of Versus Seekers to basically give us access to 8 copies of Welder or an extra copy of our other supporters here and there. And really, this helps to smooth over some of the inherent inconsistencies in a more Welder-based deck like this. Heat Factory Prism Star offers a bit more draw power at the expense of a single fire energy, which is really great when you're trying to dig a little deeper into your deck to find a VMAX, for example, a Floatstone, or a key supporter. Giant Hearth provides you with a consistent search for fire energies, in particular, nabbing you the two that you really need to make a Welder work every turn. Fire Crystal provides a bit more recovery, either getting your energies back to Welder onto your attackers, or even just set up extra discard fodder when required. Field Blower allows you to clear away troublesome stadiums and tools, in particular opposing chaotic swells, which really put a damper on the whole Giant Hearth Welder combo. Our Pokeball package consists of Quick Ball and Ultra Ball. In this particular case, I wanted as many outs to Lele and to Garbodor and Trubbish as possible, so I really don't mind the discard, and ditching the fire energies is often acceptable because Victini and its VMAX can actually accelerate energy from the discard pile. Also, you really do need that Omni Search to grab your evolving Pokemon like Victini VMAX and Garbodor, so Ultra Ball in particular was an obvious choice here. And we've got a full set of Floatstones to give us some much needed mobility and allow us to turn off enemy abilities with Garbotoxin. Oh, and we've got a healthy count of fire energy so that we can Welder for days, obviously. Now, I actually really enjoy the approach to this deck. It's nice because it kind of allows the Victinis to do their own thing. You know, either you build up the V with a ton of energy and go in hard, or you take that slower route with the VMAX, occasionally punishing enemy Vs that might be out of the reach of an energy burst. But of course, you kind of need to be mindful about where and how you attach your energy, because while you can load up a Victini V to do a ton of damage, once it evolves into a VMAX, it's a little bit awkward because it only needs 2 energy to attack, and you might have 7 crammed onto that VMAX now, so just be mindful of when you choose to evolve. But yeah, that aside, it's a really fun deck, and while it is a bit of an extreme overhaul of the V Battle Deck, you know, I hope you can understand that the V Battle Decks really are just expensive ways to brute force a single of a Victini V, and you know, yeah, I love Expanded. So I thought that that would provide for a bit more nuanced gameplay, especially, you know, when you have to contend with GXs and EXs and all of that. And really, I'm just enjoying the card pool, so I thought, let's go a little ham with this one. And now that we've got Victini all fired up, let's try to bring the heat to the expanded ladder. Okay, so was actually quite a bit of fun. And while I am firmly still in the one prizer camp, I did find myself warming to the Victinis. The V is actually a reasonably balanced attacker that becomes more threatening in proportion to your opponent, more so, if they're accelerating a ton of energy. And the VMAX really kind of punishes the use of big basics, Vs particularly, while not actually being able to completely obliterate single prizers. Only doing 100 damage when you're not hitting a Pokemon V, that actually kind of matters in a lot of situations, and it might give those one prize decks a way to catch up, which I actually kind of like. Like, honestly, I would love to see more of this kind of design out of the Vs and VMAXs going forward, especially after the tag teams all rotate out. Now, all that said, all my praise for the Victinis aside, I'm still not sold on the V Battle decks just yet. I think giving just one copy of the deck boss is kind of in bad taste, especially when at the moment they are all Pokemon that you need to evolve in order to really get the most out of your deck, the archetype that you're playing, right? And for evolving archetypes like Blastoise VMAX, Victini VMAX, Gardevoir VMAX, you really need to have multiples of the base Pokemon and the VMAX to have your decks be consistent. But these decks cost 20 Canadian each, so to have a playset of Victini Vs, again, that's just the Vs, you need to spend $80. Think about if you wanted to get your hands on a playset of the Blastoise VMAX line. That gets even more expensive because the Blastoise V boxes, they only come with one copy, I think? So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Especially when you consider what you get in a League Battle deck, the value really starts to look dubious at least. That and the lineups are pretty rough. Even the most average theme decks that we've covered so far in this series have actually provided some really solid cards. Like at least a few interesting draw supporters, some more interesting switching choices like a skateboard or escape rope, and even former staples like Field Blower and Guzma. Can you imagine basically getting a boss's orders in a theme deck? But you don't really have any of that here. And these cost more. They cost more than theme decks, and they kind of give you, well, really just a lot less, right, for the money. Sure, you get a really nice shiny V card, which, again, is nice. It's kind of an acknowledgement that this is the direction that the game is going, which that's a whole discussion on its own. But still, I'm not really sold in terms of a cost to value provided ratio. Now, sure, these are beginners products, but so were the original theme decks. And when I say original, I mean, from the last couple generations, like late X and Y, throughout Sun and Moon. And when I look at something like Tropical Takedown or Mock Strike, for example, you do get this idea of a grand strategy that was supported by very solid lists. Like Alolan Exeggutor and Garchomp, those decks actually have strategies with a pretty severe degree of complexity, right? Like understanding how you get all the different energies into the discard pile and make that work with your different types of attackers with Exeggutor. Or in the case of Garchomp, it's this combo with Cynthia and the Lucario, right? And finding ways like when do you play the supporter, right? How do you do damage? What card do you fetch, etc., etc., right? Like this isn't simple stuff. They expected kids to get that. So I don't know, the whole idea that, well, it's a beginner product, so don't expect too much. Again, I don't know if I'm sold on that. Like at least with those older theme decks, you could actually take the cores of those decks and make a few tweaks here and there to have them be at least somewhat competitive. You could take Mock Strike or Imperial Command, with some decent upgrades. You could take them to your locals and probably do okay. But the V Battle decks are mostly filler, and they really lack the quality cards to justify the cost. Now, I will say this one is a lot better than the initial Venusaur and Blastoise decks, which really were 99% filler, aside from the Blastoise itself, and I think the one or two copies of Capacious Bucket that you got in that one. But still, comparing this to those, it's not saying a lot. So as far as the V Battle decks are concerned, I am going to cautiously wait for them to improve, and perhaps after the annual rotation, the designers will give us some more competitive lists, right? And you have to keep in mind, this is pretty early on in this product's life cycle, so I'm sure they're just kind of feeling things out, and eventually the lists will get a little bit better. It's not like the initial starter decks in early Sun and Moon were that fantastic either, so who knows, right? There's always room for improvement. But if not, there are always the more competitive products like the League Battle decks, and as long as, at release, they're not too bonkers expensive, you always have somewhere to go to get something a little bit more substantial. Now, I'd be really curious to hear what you guys think about the V Battle decks. Are they better than I give them credit for? Do they kind of leave you wanting more? Or, should we just give them a bit more room to mature into better products? Whatever your take, I would love to hear it in the comments section down below. And really, that'll wrap it up for this week. So I will catch you all next time. And until then, take it easy.